concert hall stood tall in the middle of the city, glowing softly as evening lights reflected off its wide glass doors. Inside, the air felt serious and polished, the kind of place where every sound mattered. People walked carefully, voices low, shoes clicking against the shiny floor. It was the night of a big performance, one that had been advertised for weeks. Music lovers filled the seats, dressed neatly, holding programs and whispering about how special the night was supposed to be. On the stage, a grand piano rested under bright lights, its black surface shining like a mirror. Workers moved around quietly, checking microphones, adjusting chairs, making sure everything was perfect. This hall was known for excellence. Only the best musicians played here, and every performance was expected to be flawless. Backstage, the pianist prepared in silence. She had played in many places like this before, and she carried herself with confidence. People around her spoke with respect, offering compliments and last-minute encouragement. She nodded politely, already focused on the music ahead. To her, this night was important but also familiar. She had spent years earning her place on stages like this. While all this happened, another figure moved quietly through the hall, almost invisible. A janitor pushed a cleaning cart along the side aisle, careful not to disturb anyone. He wore simple work clothes, slightly worn from years of use. His movements were slow and careful, as if he understood that this place demanded respect. As he cleaned, he paused now and then, glancing toward the stage. His eyes followed the piano, not with curiosity, but with something deeper. When no one was watching, his fingers moved lightly in the air, as if pressing invisible keys. He stopped himself quickly, looking around to make sure no one noticed, then returned to his work. The janitor had worked in this hall for many years. He knew its quiet corners, the way sound carried even from the smallest movement, and how the building seemed to breathe when music filled it. Most people never noticed him. To them, he was just part of the background, someone who kept the place clean and moved out of the way. Earlier that day, during rehearsal, the hall had been almost empty. The pianist practiced a difficult piece, her playing sharp and controlled. Each note landed exactly where it should. Staff members listened with approval, whispering about her skill. From the back of the hall, the janitor paused again, resting his hands on the handle of his mop. The music stirred something inside him. His chest tightened slightly, and memories rose without warning. Long nights, old lessons, a small room with a piano that had chipped keys. He swallowed and looked down, grounding himself in the present. This was not his world anymore, he reminded himself. When the rehearsal ended, the pianist stood and stretched her hands. A few people clapped lightly. She smiled, pleased but not surprised. Compliments followed her as she stepped off the stage. The janitor hesitated. He knew the moment would pass if he didn't speak now. His heart beat faster as he wiped his hands on a cloth. He approached slowly, stopping a few steps away from the group around her. His voice, when he spoke, was gentle and unsure. He asked politely if he could have a moment with the piano later, just for a short time. He explained that he wouldn't disturb anything and would leave it exactly as it was. His words were careful, respectful, and honest. The group fell quiet for a second. Then someone let out a short laugh. The pianist turned and looked at him fully for the first time. Her expression shifted from confusion to amusement. She glanced at his uniform, then back at his face. The idea seemed so unexpected that it sounded like a joke to her. She smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had never been questioned in a place like this. She asked him if he was serious. The janitor nodded. He didn't explain more. He didn't mention his past or his reasons. He only repeated that he wanted to play for a moment. A few people exchanged looks. Some smiled, others shook their heads. The pianist let out a soft laugh and made a light comment that caused more quiet laughter around her. No one meant to be cruel, but the message was clear. This stage was not for someone like him. The janitor felt heat rise to his face. His hands tightened slightly, but he kept his voice calm. He apologized if he had spoken out of place. He said he understood and began to step back. Something about his reaction slowed the moment. He wasn't angry. He wasn't begging. He accepted the response with quiet dignity, as if he had expected it all along. For a brief second, the pianist felt an odd discomfort, though she couldn't explain why. One of the staff members, trying to keep things light, suggested that if there was time after the concert, maybe they could think about it. The tone made it clear it wasn't a serious promise. The janitor thanked them and returned to his cart. As he walked away, his shoulders stayed straight, but his eyes lowered. He focused on his work again, wiping seats, straightening programs, preparing the hall for the night ahead. As the audience began to arrive, the hall filled with noise and excitement. The janitor moved along the edges, invisible once more. Yet inside him something stirred. The request he had made, the laughter he had heard, all of it mixed with a quiet determination he hadn't felt in years. He knew this might be his only chance, even if no one else believed it mattered. He continued working as the lights dimmed and the crowd settled, the piano waiting silently at the center of the stage, unaware of the story slowly unfolding around it. The night of the concert moved forward with steady energy. People filled the seats, coats folded neatly over laps, phones set to silent. Soft chatter floated through the hall, mixing with the low hum of anticipation. The lights above the stage glowed warmly, making the piano shine even brighter than before. Everything felt important, like something memorable was about to happen. Behind the scenes, the pianist took a deep breath and adjusted her posture. She rolled her shoulders, stretched her fingers, and focused her thoughts. This was her moment, just like many others before it. She reminded herself that the audience had come to hear her play, to be impressed, to be moved. Confidence settled in her chest like a familiar weight. Out in the hall, the janitor finished his last tasks. He wiped down a railing, checked the floor near the aisles, and quietly pushed his cart toward the back. No one paid him much attention. They were busy finding seats, greeting friends, and flipping through programs. That was fine with him. He was used to being unseen. As the lights slowly dimmed, the noise softened into silence. The pianist walked onto the stage, greeted by strong applause. She bowed with ease, taking her place at the piano. Her hands hovered above the keys for a brief second before she began. The music filled the hall, clear and powerful. Each note was sharp, practiced, and exact. The audience listened closely, many closing their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. It was impressive, just as everyone expected. The pianist moved with confidence, her face calm and focused. From the back of the hall, the janitor stood still. He leaned lightly against the wall, careful not to make a sound. He listened deeply, following every note. He could tell how skilled she was, how much work had gone into her playing. He respected that. Still, something inside him remained restless. As the piece ended, applause burst through the hall. The pianist stood and bowed again, a small smile appearing on her face. She enjoyed the moment, the recognition, the feeling of being admired. She returned to the piano and began another piece. Time passed quickly. One song blended into the next. The audience stayed engaged, clapping politely between performances. Everything went exactly as planned. Nothing unexpected happened. And yet, beneath the smooth surface of the evening, a quiet tension remained. During a short pause, when the pianist stepped off stage to rest her hands, the janitor felt that familiar pull again. His heart began to race. He knew this might be the only window he would get. Once the concert ended, the hall would empty, and the piano would be closed and locked away. He stood there, arguing with himself. Part of him told him to stay quiet, to avoid embarrassment. Another part reminded him that he had already asked once and had nothing left to lose. The laughter from earlier echoed faintly in his mind, but so did years of silence he had carried. He took a slow breath and moved forward. Carefully, he approached the side of the stage where a staff member stood watching the clock. In a low voice, he asked if the pianist might allow him a moment at the piano after the final piece. He promised it would be brief. He promised he would not damage anything or waste time. The staff member looked surprised, then unsure. He glanced toward the stage, then back at the janitor. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. He said he would mention it, but he couldn't promise anything. The janitor nodded. That was all he needed. A chance, even a small one. When the pianist returned for the final piece, her energy sharpened. This was the part she enjoyed the most, the moment meant to leave the strongest impression. She played with intensity, filling the hall with sound that felt bold and controlled. As the last note rang out, the audience erupted into loud applause. Some people stood. The pianist rose from her seat, smiling now without hesitation. She bowed deeply, enjoying the praise. The night had been a success. As the applause slowly faded, the staff member stepped forward and spoke quietly to her. He mentioned the janitor's request again, explaining that the man had been polite and persistent. He added that the hall was still full and that people were waiting for what would happen next. The pianist raised her eyebrows, clearly surprised that the request had come up again. She looked out toward the crowd, then toward the back of the hall where the janitor stood, hands folded in front of him. For a moment she considered saying no outright. This was her stage, her night. Letting a janitor touch the piano felt unnecessary, even risky. What if he embarrassed himself? What if he embarrassed her? But something held her back. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the quiet confidence she had noticed earlier. Or maybe it was the feeling that the night was already complete, and a few extra minutes wouldn't matter. She nodded slowly. The staff member announced that there would be a brief moment before the hall cleared. Murmurs spread through the audience. People leaned forward, confused but interested. The janitor felt his legs weaken slightly as he realized what was happening. He swallowed and stepped out from the shadows. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure others could hear it. He walked toward the stage, every step heavy with years of doubt and hope. Some people whispered. Others stared openly. A few smiled, thinking it was part of the show. The janitor kept his eyes on the piano. He reached the stage and paused. He looked back once, almost as if asking permission from himself. Then he climbed the steps. The pianist stood aside, arms folded loosely. Her face showed polite interest but nothing more. She expected something simple, maybe even awkward. She had already decided she would stop it quickly if needed. The janitor sat down slowly on the piano bench. He adjusted it carefully, just as a trained player would. That small detail went unnoticed by most, but not by the pianist. Her posture shifted slightly. He placed his hands above the keys, closed his eyes for a brief second, and took one steady breath. The hall fell quiet. Just before his fingers touched the piano, the room seemed to hold its breath, unaware that everything was about to change. The janitor's fingers touched the keys gently, almost as if he was asking the piano for permission. The first sound was soft, so soft that a few people leaned forward to make sure they were really hearing it. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was careful, warm, and steady. The kind of sound that didn't demand attention but slowly pulled it in. The pianist stood nearby, watching closely. At first, her face showed polite patience, the look of someone waiting for a quick mistake. She expected shaky notes, maybe a simple tune played with uncertainty. Instead, the notes came out clean and balanced. His hands moved with quiet confidence, not rushed, not stiff. As the music continued, something shifted in the room. Conversations stopped completely. The soft rustle of programs disappeared. Even the smallest sounds seemed to fade away. The hall felt different, as if the walls themselves were listening. The janitor played as if no one else existed. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing slowed. Years of silence fell away with each note. The piano responded to his touch, producing a rich sound that filled the space without effort. People in the audience exchanged looks. Some raised their eyebrows. Others sat still, eyes wide. A few leaned back in their seats, surprised by the calm power of what they were hearing. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't luck. This was skill. The pianist's expression changed. Her arms slowly dropped to her sides. She noticed the way his fingers curved naturally, the way his wrists floated just above the keys. These were not the hands of a beginner. These were the hands of someone who knew the instrument deeply. The music began to grow. What started as something gentle turned into something emotional. The melody carried sadness, hope, and quiet strength all at once. Felt personal, like a story told without words. The janitor remembered things as he played. A small room where he once practiced late at night. A piano that went out of tune too often. Lessons he took seriously, dreams he held tightly. He remembered the moment life changed, when responsibility replaced possibility. None of that stopped his hands now. It only gave them more meaning. The audience felt it too, even without knowing his story. Some people swallowed hard. Others pressed their lips together, feeling something they hadn't expected to feel that night. Music had a way of doing that when it was honest. The pianist shifted her weight slightly. She felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was recognition. She realized she was listening, truly listening, not judging or comparing. The janitor moved into a more complex section. His fingers danced across the keys, quick but controlled. Each note landed exactly where it should. There was no showing off, no need to prove anything. The music spoke for itself. Someone in the audience leaned forward with their hands clasped. Another closed their eyes completely. A man in the back wiped at his face, surprised by the sudden moisture in his eyes. The hall remained perfectly still. No one coughed. No one shifted in their seat. It felt like time had slowed down, stretched thin by the weight of the moment. The pianist now stood frozen. Her earlier confidence felt distant. She noticed small details she had missed before. The way the janitor adjusted his bench without looking. The way he listened to the sound he created, adjusting his touch instantly. These were signs of experience, not chance. As the piece reached its peak, the sound grew fuller, stronger. The piano seemed to come alive under his hands. The notes filled every corner of the hall, not loud enough to overwhelm, but strong enough to demand respect. The janitor's face remained calm, but his eyes glistened slightly. He wasn't thinking about the audience. He wasn't thinking about the pianist. He was playing for the younger version of himself, the one who once believed music would be his life. The final section slowed again. The melody softened, as if saying goodbye. His fingers pressed the last notes with care, letting them fade naturally into silence. When the final note disappeared, no one moved. The silence lasted longer than expected. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, full of feeling. The kind of silence that happens when people don't know how to react because words feel too small. The janitor lifted his hands from the keys slowly. He sat still, unsure of what to do next. For a brief moment, doubt returned. He wondered if he had played too long. He wondered if he had crossed a line. Then someone in the front row began to clap. One pair of hands became many. The sound grew quickly, filling the hall just as the music had. People stood. Applause echoed off the walls, loud and honest. This was not polite clapping. This was shock, respect, and gratitude all mixed together. The janitor stood up, overwhelmed. He looked around, unsure where to look. He had spent years unnoticed, and now every eye in the room was on him. The pianist stepped forward without thinking. She clapped too, her hands moving firmly, her expression serious. When the janitor turned toward her, their eyes met. In that moment, everything she had assumed fell apart. She saw not a janitor, not a uniform, but a musician. The applause continued. Some people smiled warmly at him. Others nodded with quiet approval. A few whispered, still trying to understand what they had just witnessed. The janitor gave a small, awkward bow. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. He stepped back from the piano, his legs unsteady. The pianist spoke softly, just loud enough for those near the stage to hear. She thanked him. The words were simple, but they carried weight. As the applause slowly faded, the hall felt changed. The night had taken a turn no one expected. What began as a moment of doubt and quiet mockery had turned into something powerful. The janitor walked off the stage, his heart still racing. He didn't know what would happen next. He only knew that something important had just happened, something that could not be undone. Behind him, the piano sat silently once more, its keys still warm, as if holding onto the memory of the hands that had awakened it. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling it left behind stayed heavy in the air. People remained standing for a moment longer than usual, unsure whether to sit or keep clapping. Some looked toward the stage, others toward the aisle where the janitor had disappeared. No one spoke. It felt like everyone was trying to understand what they had just witnessed. The janitor stood near the side wall, his back resting lightly against it. His chest rose and fell quickly as he tried to calm his breathing. His hands still felt warm, almost alive, as if the piano had left something behind in them. He stared at the floor, afraid that if he looked up, the moment would break apart and turn into embarrassment. A staff member approached him quietly. The man's face looked different now, softer, more careful. He thanked the janitor for what he had done and asked him to wait for a moment. His tone carried respect, not pity. On the stage, the pianist remained standing near the piano. She hadn't moved much since the applause ended. Her thoughts felt loud inside her head. She replayed the performance again and again, noticing details she couldn't ignore. The steady rhythm, the deep emotion, the complete control. None of it matched the image she had formed earlier. She felt a small sting of shame, not because someone had played better than her, but because of how quickly she had judged him. She remembered the laugh, the light comment, the way she had smiled without kindness. Those moments now felt heavy. The audience slowly began to settle back into their seats. Some people whispered to each other, their voices filled with surprise. Others stayed quiet, still emotional. A few glanced at the pianist, curious about what she would do next. The pianist took a slow breath and stepped forward. She raised a hand slightly, signaling that she wanted to speak. The room grew quiet again. She thanked the audience for staying and for listening. Her voice was calm, but there was something different in it now. Less pride, more honesty. She then turned slightly toward the side of the stage and invited the janitor to join her. A wave of murmurs moved through the hall. The janitor froze. For a brief moment, he wondered if he had heard wrong. The staff member beside him gave a small nod and gently motioned toward the stage. His legs felt heavy as he stepped forward. Every eye followed him again. This time, he didn't feel invisible. He climbed the steps slowly, careful with each movement. The pianist waited until he stood beside her. She looked at him fully now, not at his uniform, not at his job, but at his face. She thanked him for sharing his music. She admitted, without excuses, that she had been wrong to doubt him. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. The audience listened closely. Some nodded. Others smiled softly. The janitor felt his throat tighten. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this in front of others. He nodded once, unsure what to say. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. He said he had only played because music was important to him. He said he never meant to take anyone's place. That honesty touched the room again. The pianist asked him where he had learned to play. The question wasn't loud, but everyone could hear it. The janitor hesitated, then explained that he had studied music when he was younger. Life had changed and he had taken another path. He never stopped loving music even when he stopped playing publicly. No long story, no dramatic details, just the truth. The pianist nodded slowly. She understood more than she expected to. She had dedicated her life to music too, but she had been lucky. She had support, chances, doors that opened at the right time. Not everyone had that. Someone in the audience began clapping again, softly at first. Others joined in, not as loudly as before, but warmly, like encouragement. The staff member announced that the hall would soon close. People began to gather their things, still talking quietly about what they had seen. Many glanced back at the stage one last time. As the crowd slowly left, a few people approached the janitor. They thanked him. One person said the music reminded them why they loved listening to piano in the first place. Another said it felt real. The janitor listened, slightly overwhelmed. He smiled politely, not knowing how to respond to praise. Later, when the hall was nearly empty, the pianist returned to the stage area. The lights were dimmer now, softer. She sat down on the edge of the stage and asked the janitor if he would sit too. They talked quietly. About music. About how hard it was to keep going when life pulled you away from what you loved. About how strange it felt to perform for people after such a long time. There was no competition in her tone. No distance. Just two people who understood the same language in different ways. She asked if he still played often. He admitted that he played only when he could, sometimes late at night, sometimes only in his head. She nodded, thinking. Before leaving, she told him that what he had done mattered. Not just to the audience, but to her. She said it reminded her to listen better, not just to music, but to people. The janitor thanked her. He meant it. When he finally returned to his work, the hall felt different. Quieter but warmer. He pushed his cart slowly, his mind still full of sound. The piano sat closed now, resting under its cover. But it no longer felt distant. Felt familiar again. As he turned off the last light and headed toward the exit, he didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long while he felt seen. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. Morning light slipped through the tall windows of the concert hall, touching the empty seats and the quiet stage. The place felt different after the night before, like it was holding on to a secret. The janitor arrived early, just as he always did. He unlocked the doors, rolled in his cart, and began his routine. Yet nothing felt routine anymore. As he moved through the aisles, he noticed small signs of the night that had passed. A folded program left on a seat. A chair slightly out of line. He fixed each detail carefully, the same way he always had. But inside, his thoughts kept returning to the piano, to the sound he had made, and to the silence that followed. He didn't expect anything to change. Moments like that, he knew, often faded by morning. People went back to their lives. The hall returned to normal. He was prepared for that. Later that morning, a staff member approached him with a polite smile. He asked if the janitor had a few minutes to talk. The tone was respectful, not rushed. They sat in a quiet corner near the stage. The staff member explained that several people from the audience had asked about him after the concert. Some wanted to know who he was. Others wanted to hear him play again. A few had even left messages. The janitor listened quietly, unsure how to react. He nodded, trying to understand what this meant. The staff member added that the pianist had also asked about him. She wanted to speak with him again before leaving the city. A familiar mix of hope and caution rose inside him. He had learned not to let moments grow too big in his mind. Still, he agreed to meet. When they spoke later that day, it wasn't on the stage or under bright lights. It was in a simple room with 2 chairs and a small table. The pianist thanked him again. She spoke openly about how the night had affected her. She said it reminded her that music wasn't about titles or stages. It was about honesty. She asked him what he wanted. The question surprised him. No one had asked him that in a long time. He thought carefully before answering. He said he wanted to play more. Not for fame, not for attention, but because it felt like a part of him that had been asleep. She nodded. She said that was reason enough. Over the next few days, small things began to change. The janitor was invited to practice on the piano during quiet hours. At first, it felt strange to sit there without fear of being interrupted. Slowly, the tension eased. His hands remembered what to do. A few staff members stopped to listen from a distance. No one laughed. No one questioned why he was there. Word spread quietly, not loudly. He wasn't suddenly famous. But people spoke with respect. Some asked him about music. Others simply smiled when they passed him. One afternoon, the pianist returned to the hall unexpectedly. She listened from the back as he played. When he finished, she applauded softly and told him he had something special, something that couldn't be taught. She suggested a small performance. Nothing grand, just a short moment before another event, for anyone who wished to stay and listen. She made it clear that the choice was his. He took time to think about it. Fear returned, but it no longer felt as strong as before. He remembered the silence after his last note, and how it had felt full instead of empty. He agreed. The night of the small performance arrived. The hall was not full. There were no big announcements. Just a quiet gathering of people who had heard the story or were curious. The janitor walked onto the stage without applause. He sat at the piano and took a breath. This time his hands did not shake. He played simply, honestly. The music flowed without effort. It didn't try to impress. It only tried to speak. When he finished, the response was gentle but real. Smiles, nods, soft clapping. He felt something settle inside him, a sense of peace. Life did not change overnight. He still cleaned the hall. He still pushed his cart through the aisles. But now he also practiced regularly. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with a few listeners. The pianist left the city, but they stayed in touch. She sent messages of encouragement. Sometimes she asked how his playing was going. Sometimes she simply reminded him not to disappear again. Months passed. The janitor began teaching a few simple lessons to children whose families worked nearby. He showed them how to listen, how to feel the keys, how to be patient with mistakes. He never spoke about the concert unless they asked. The hall continued to host great performances. Famous musicians came and went. The janitor watched them with appreciation, not envy. Every now and then, someone recognized him and smiled. A few stopped to say they still remembered that night. He always thanked them politely and returned to his work. One evening, long after closing, he sat alone at the piano. The lights were low. The hall was silent. He played softly, letting the sound fill the empty space. He realized then that the greatest gift of that night wasn't the applause or the attention. It was the reminder that he hadn't lost himself after all. The piano answered gently as it always had. And in that quiet hall, the music continued, not as a performance, but as a promise kept.